The case in Michigan, admittedly, does not prove that the FBI used similar tactics with groups regarding the Capitol riot, but it does point to an institutional willingness to contemplate the use of such actions. That means key questions have to be asked of the law enforcement leaders who work for us. And thankfully, Matt Gaetz, he is asking them. In a letter to FBI Director Wray, Gaetz demands to know about federal law enforcement's infiltration of these groups before the riot, details of any involvement or presence during the riots, and if any operatives were subsequently spared prosecution. Of course, one of the simplest ways to clear up lingering questions is simply release the massive trove of video footage from that day. All of it, right now. Investigators possess as much as 14,000 hours of such footage. Why can't the public see it? Their claim that such a release represents a security threat is ridiculous on its face, as every single inch of that building is already available online to anyone. But these law enforcement leaders are not acting like public servants. Instead, they're acting like an unaccountable force that views itself as a sort of parallel government. It's time for transparency, and it's time for answers. Joining us now to discuss is Florida Congressman, House Judiciary Committee member Matt Gaetz. Congressman Gaetz, I applaud you for sending this letter regarding the taped footage. We paid for these cameras. We own this building, the taxpayers of the United States. Is there any legitimate reason to not give immediate public access to all of these tapes?
Absolutely not. And the FBI clearly doesn't have objections to selected releases of video and images from these days. But it begs the question, why is there not more transparency? What did the FBI know, and when did they know it? That's one legitimate question. But as you point out in your introduction, the question of whether or not the FBI animated some of the criminal conduct is one that is far more grave. You talked about the Detroit situation with Governor Whitmer. The very same FBI personnel that orchestrated that operation end up in Washington, D.C. at the headquarters. And so it's reasonable to ask whether or not the FBI is engaged in a playbook where first they infiltrate an organization and then they try to bring that organization to the point of criminal conduct as a mechanism to try to bring it down. The FBI has a long history of this, dating back to even the civil rights era, and I certainly hope that our premier law enforcement organization is not actually working to violate federal law.
Congressman, you know, A.G. Garland wants to speak of the 75 million Americans, roughly, that voted for President Trump. He sees them as white supremacists, sees them, a number of them, as domestic terrorists. What does this potentially mean for those individuals, not only those that were at the Capitol, but others that the AG wants to kind of paint in that light?
Throughout the enterprise of the Biden government, whether it's in the Department of Defense, where our military members are enduring this ridiculous screening, or whether it is at the Department of Justice, where people who merely engaged in a criminal trespass or maybe didn't even enter the Capitol building at all are subject to this type of criminal process, we see an FBI and a Department of Justice that I think has strayed from its original mission, and now they're engaging as political actors. And you know, Jen, I've been called a conspiracy theorist just for asking these questions, but whether it was the Russia hoax that was nonsense or the origins of the coronavirus at the Wuhan lab, I've got a pretty good track record of being right when I make pronouncements. And what I could say is there was FBI infiltration of these groups, and what we've got to decide is whether or not that infiltration led to more acute criminal conduct than would have otherwise occurred.
That's right. And, you know, Matt, I think it's incumbent upon us as Americans, as citizens of this republic, to always be skeptical of government power, and that's exactly what you're doing. But it hasn't stopped the media from freaking out all week long against you, against Darren Beattie, against the Revolver article. And it's interesting, one of the few real journalists, I think, out there, Glenn Greenwald, he put up this tweet. He said, "I'm a little unclear about this massive CNN, NBC, Washington Post freakout today about questions regarding FBI infiltration of the groups behind 1-6. DHS has been warning for 2 years that they pose the greatest threat. Do people doubt that FBI infiltrated them and had informants in them?" So to your point, Congressman, it's natural for us to assume that these groups were infiltrated. The real question, it seems to me, and I want to know if you really believe Director Wray is going to answer this question, is was it more than simply infiltration to observe? Were they actually agitating and perhaps even organizing?
Well, and to answer that second question, you must answer the first. The good news is that Director Wray can clear all of this up. He can lay out the extent to which there was infiltration, and he could tell us yes or no. Were there FBI agents or operatives who were present on January 6th who entered the Capitol on January 6th? And if that is the case, then I think we'll have a lot more follow-up. Definitely. But, oh, the CNN thing, it's just so rich, Steve, that you had Cuomo interviewing Andrew McCabe, of all people, to talk about the operations of the FBI, one of the most corrupt, one of the most devious people ever to have been associated with the FBI, and he's the one the CNN has given commentary.
So you've got an August 1st deadline, Congressman. How confident are you that you are going to receive a clear answer?
If we do not receive an answer by August 1st, then we're going to have to utilize the Judiciary Committee. We're going to have to bring officials forward, not only from the FBI, but from the Department of Justice, to get answers. But that is our job in the minority, to get answers, to lay bare before the American people what their government is doing, and then to hope that people actually expect and want better so that we can be returned to the majority, and that gives us the more robust opportunity for oversight over a Biden government that has gone off the rails.
Right. Congressman, you mentioned the disgraced Andy McCabe, and I want to ask you a more sort of almost philosophical question regarding the FBI, because I had assumed for a long time, given the tactics of the FBI in recent years, that it was only poisoned at the top, that it was people like McCabe and Comey and Strzok who were political partisans and unworthy of serving in law enforcement. But I have to say, the more I read about these incidents, the work that Revolver has done, the stuff that you've uncovered, the antics in Michigan, it makes me think that the FBI is poisoned throughout the organization. Is this hallowed, at least formerly hallowed organization of law enforcement in the United States, does it need to be completely overhauled?
There are many FBI agents around the world that do great work, but I do not believe we are dealing with a small group of bad apples. I think that the FBI has morphed into a political opposition research organization and a political activism organization more than a law enforcement organization. Law enforcement is done best at the state and local level, not with a bunch of folks in Washington, D.C. who are addicted to the coverage that they receive from the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN. I think that we have uncovered through the Russia hoax and through a number of these circumstances an agency that has a whole lot of swamp left in it that needs to be drained. And I think we're going to have to take back the majority, have oversight, and then ultimately take back the White House and get somebody over there that can do a better job than Bill Barr did.
Well, Congressman Matt Gaetz, we appreciate you coming on tonight, and thanks for asking those questions.
Thank you, guys. Congrats on the new show. I love it.
Thank you.